even want to go back to our house because, like, that's where my little boy, like you don't. I'm gonna have nightmares the rest of my life for this.
Newly released body camera video showing a mom's first interactions with law enforcement at the hospital after her little boy drowned in their bathtub. She told police that she stepped away for 5 minutes to change the laundry while he was taking a bath, but then police checked the phone records and say that told a different story. The story of Olivia Elizabeth Miller and her young son Asher. This is an incredibly tragic story. It's a story of a young mom who loses her son in a way that the judge said was not intentional. But the state of Michigan and the criminal justice system there did see this as a case of involuntary manslaughter. And before I get to the body cam video that we just got and where this case is today, I want to take you back to the day that this happened, November 22nd, 2023. That's when Miller called 911 at 3:38 p.m. and told dispatchers that her son had drowned in the bathtub. This was her son, Asher. He was just 8 months old. Officers found him lying face up on the floor and rushed him to the hospital where he died. Miller told officers that she put her son in the tub with just a few inches of water and then went to change the laundry. She said that when she got back to the bathroom, her son was face up in the water and she tried to resuscitate him. We requested the body camera video of Miller's first interactions with officers at the hospital. Most of the more than 40 minutes we received was redacted. But the body cam did show a conversation that Miller had with a police officer at the hospital.
I'm just going to go over this for a little bit. We can't go too far, unfortunately, just because it's a hospital and there's other people that are around. Okay, we can just hang out here so you get a little bit more air, right? You have something else to focus on. And we'll see, I can go check where Keenan is, but then I would have to ask you to stay in the room, but we'll just take a second out here.
Why are we being, treated like we're animals right now?
No, we're not trying to treat
Like,
you
I don't-
like
I don't even want to go back to our house because, like, that's where my little boy, like you don't. I'm gonna have nightmares the rest of my life for this. I can't bring back my son. I would never imagine him. Like, we were literally just having the best time at daycare today. You know?
Yeah. And then this happens completely out of the blue.
Like that, like, I don't believe, like, well, I believe in, like, heaven and stuff, but, like, I don't believe that it was his time.
Yeah. I don't believe that either. No, it's never their time, right?
Like, he was supposed to grow up.
Yeah.
It is incredibly difficult to hear a mom, no matter the circumstances of this case, to hear a mom come to grips with what happened in her home as she's talking to this police officer. The officer then asked questions of Miller, like whether she drank alcohol, which she said no, or used drugs, which she also said no. The body cam redacted the audio of her answering questions about any medication she was prescribed and where she worked. The audio then picks up with the officer asking what time Miller put her son in the bathtub.
2:20? 2:30? I have no idea.
Okay.
I was sitting there, like, talking to him.
You had mentioned that you had owned the call logs.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the passcode? Oh, good.
Sorry, everyone's been calling me.
Nope, you're good. So it looks like...
Wait, no. Wait down here. 7-second call. I called her a lot today. So.
You called her a lot?
I literally just had gotten off the phone with her. So.
Okay.
I guess maybe it was a lot longer after 3 o'clock. I don't even know. Oops.
And then we called 911 at 3:38.
Okay, so it was at like 3 o'clock. I had the times mixed up.
Okay, is when you put him in the bath?
No, I had put... possibly to that 911 call.
Okay.
So I just had the times mixed up. So we were home for a little bit, but he did take a nap in that nap chair thingy, and then he wouldn't go down.
And
I
3.
left him there for a second.
Okay, and then you called 911.
Yeah.
And then you started CPR.
Well, attempting, yeah. I did CPR.
Can you explain to me what you were able to do?
Well, I was doing these things, the compulsions.
Yeah.
And then I put my mouth up to his, and then he puked in my mouth.
Okay.
And then I almost puked about it.
Yeah.
And then I kept doing it, I kept pushing on. What are you talking about?
Did he ever regain consciousness during that? No. Did he scream or cry at all during that? So he puked in your mouth. Okay.
Like, he was like, there's stuff coming out of his nose, like the water, like kept coming out of his mouth and his nose.
Hey, by the way, what does Bodycam on Law and Crime prove? It's that the world is unpredictable and having a good lawyer matters, and that's where Morgan & Morgan comes in, the exclusive personal injury law firm of Law and Crime. They're a law firm with more than 1,000 attorneys, and that's because they win a lot. Let me read for you just some of what they were able to secure in just the past couple of months. How about this? A $29 million settlement for a bicyclist in Philadelphia, $2.7 million for a car accident victim in Florida, and $5.6 million for a car crash victim in Georgia. And this was all after their insurance companies weren't going to offer them a dollar. Even if your case isn't worth millions, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it truly so easy. You can start a claim just from your phone like this in 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Bodycam, or you can click the link in the description. It's also pinned in the comments. The officer then brings over a nurse who tries to console Miller.
Andrea, this is Olivia.
You don't feel right?
Yeah.
I bet. Do you want to go sit down?
I don't want to sit, like, I feel like I need to do something for someone or something. Like, I'm so used to doing something for my baby, and, like, I'm not doing.
It's going to take time to adjust.
It's just like, have you ever seen this before? Like, is this the only baby that's ever happened to?
No, it hasn't. No, it is not.
Like, this is like a normal grief thing. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm not normal right now.
And you're not going to feel normal.
I feel like I'm in shock. Like, none of this feels real.
I mean, it's not going to for
And it's like everyone's talking about it. It's like, it's
What I
not,
want
like,
to do for you is to go find more information so I can give you an update on everything that's going on.
I'm scared to see him.
Olivia, can you stay with Andrea for right now? Is that okay?
If you just head back that way.
Again, I can't say it enough. This is a really tough story. Police would then request data from Miller's phone, and they say that told a different story than the timeline she originally gave them, and her story changed a bit as conversations went on throughout the investigation. According to an arrest affidavit reviewed by MLive.com, Miller's cell phone data showed she was constantly using her phone in the 21 minutes before she called 911 with only an 18-second break. And about 4 minutes before she called 911, she sent her father a text message about her son taking a nap. She then reportedly called her son's paternal grandmother twice and told her the baby had drowned before she called emergency responders on 911. The medical examiner estimated the infant was lying on his back on the floor in Miller's home for 20 minutes before authorities got there. Miller pleaded no contest to a count of involuntary manslaughter in her son's death. As part of a negotiated plea, prosecutors dropped a count of second-degree child abuse. A judge sentenced Miller to a year in prison with a credit of 246 days already served in jail. According to local TV station WOOD, during the sentencing, the judge noted that Miller had no previous record and she has lived as a law-abiding citizen. The judge also said that he didn't believe what happened to this young boy was intentional. Joining us now is trial lawyer Randy Kessler to talk about, we were saying before, just before we started, I mean, this is a tough case when you just see it all play out, and especially with this new body cam video that came out. When you look at the body cam, a lot of it was redacted, but about 7 minutes, 40 seconds of it, you can see Olivia Miller talking to officers. What stood out to you?
I think you said it right when we were talking off camera, brutal, but not brutal like a brutal murder, but brutal in how it, I mean, just can you imagine going through this? It's just, I think my first reaction is, why do we punish people? Why do we put them in jail? Why do we convict them? And there are 3 reasons, right? To punish, to rehabilitate, and to prevent future crimes. Well, we don't have to do any of that stuff. She's already punished, right? What bigger punishment than losing your child? Rehabilitate. What does she need to be rehabilitated? Number 3, is she ever going to do something like this again? She's never putting anyone in a bathtub and leaving them alone again. So just terrible. There's no winners. There's no closure. It's just a brutal situation.
Yeah, because the judge did note that she didn't have any prior convictions, no, has never been accused of a felony before, like really was living a life as a law-abiding citizen. She's a mom. And, on one hand, the charge of manslaughter would have been 15 years the max. So in some ways, the criminal justice system might have looked and said that this was, a plea deal for ultimately she'll spend 120 days in jail behind it. But you wouldn't have wanted to see her get any time based on what you've seen in this case.
Probably not. I mean, I think maybe in a cathartic, therapeutic way, it was probably good for her to feel like she's not only been punished by her own soul and what she's done, but society punished her too, and she's paid her penance to society and to any other victims, other relatives that might be grieving the loss. So, I don't think it's terrible that she spent a little bit of time in jail because we've seen much worse tragedies, people going to jail for a long time that didn't do anything wrong. So it's a compromise, like most plea deals are. Tough
At
one.
the same notion, yeah, it's certainly tough, but some people may also look and say the story for her originally was she went to go change laundry for 5 minutes. And then as time went on, the story changes. And then they get the phone records and she was on the phone for 20 plus minutes. At the same time, I guess, what do you make of that part of it? Because certainly there's the sympathy. No parent would ever want to see something like this happen. But then you have police officers who say that she lied to them about exactly how all this played out.
Right. So I'm smiling not at the situation, but at a memory I have, which is that my sister-in-law used to always tell my nephew, her little 4-year-old son, that we'll be ready to go in 5 minutes. And she would look at me and say, he doesn't really know what 5 minutes are. 5 minutes could be 10 minutes, could be 15 minutes. And the truth is 5 minutes in that heat of the moment when she's responding to this horrible situation and telling investigators, yeah, I was doing this for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a generic term. It's like when people say a few minutes. I don't think she was plotting an alibi or an excuse. And of course, she was trying to minimize the amount of time she was away from her child, and probably not just to authorities, but in her own mind, she wanted to believe that I only left him alone for 5 minutes. And between us, 5 minutes is too long, right? 5 minutes, somebody can drown in 5 minutes. So I don't get caught up in that, well, she lied because she said it was 5 minutes and it was really 19 minutes or 20 minutes. I think it's just heat of the moment. And it's forgivable to that kind of error. I don't think it's an overt conscientious lie and intent to deceive to get away with murder.
This was a plea deal that ultimately it was 1 year roughly in prison, and then she spent 246 days in jail because of her bond. I guess for that part of it, I mean, what do you make of the prosecutors going for her to actually have time behind bars in this situation?
So I think it was a compromise, right, between both sides. It's a cost benefit analysis on a lot of fronts. Number one, she's already spent a lot of time in jail. By the time they went to trial, first of all, there's risk for the prosecutors. She may be found innocent. She might have been acquitted. So they avoid that risk. Number two, she's already spent 90% of the time or 75% of the sentence time that they wanted behind bars. I think it's a compromise. Nobody wins, nobody loses. You don't spend more taxpayer money. She doesn't take the risk that she spends more time in jail. It sounds to me like the right result. Maybe time served. I've had cases where we've been there and the judge said, how long has your client been in jail? And we say 6 months. And they say, well, let's just end it there because he or she's been punished enough. And I think that's where they were, that she's already paid a price. And maybe they took into account, maybe it resonated the personal toll it took on her, that they don't need to push for more. And the trauma of a trial on top of the trauma of losing her child, to me, she's been through enough.
How much, in your experience with prosecutors, do they need to have that conviction, or in this case, it was a plea, but still having, hey, this person spent time behind bars as that victory for them in a case, even when it's a situation like this, where even the judge says this wasn't intentional, that you have no criminal record or anything like that, that prosecutors still at the end of the day need to be able to say this was someone who was put behind bars?
Well, I have two thoughts. One is they don't want to be seen to have taken a case or prosecute a case that they lost, right? Then they made a decision to put someone through that whole situation, make them defend themselves, and then lose. So when you get a plea, it basically is a pat on the back saying, okay, you were right to prosecute this because they accepted a plea, meaning there was a rightful prosecution, not a wrongful prosecution. The other thing is, how much more resources do they want to spend on it? They looked at it. I think they feel like she paid her time. She did her time, and what more can they do to her? I just don't think going forward does anything more for them they've gotten what they wanted. They got her punished. And really, what I want out of my prosecutors, out of the people that I pay taxes to pay, is that they're going to keep criminals off the street and prevent further crimes, future crimes. This story is a little bit sad. It sort of reminds me, when I had my child, and everyone that's got a child, you walk out of the hospital feeling like, where's the instruction manual? How do I do this?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? And that sort of, that creeped into my mind too, that she was just, we all learn on the go. There's no real Bible of how to raise a child. There's some guidelines, but you should know better, obviously, than to leave a child alone in a bathtub. But for 10 seconds, okay, 30 seconds, it's one of those, God, I didn't really think there was that much risk. And unfortunately, she learned the very, very hard way.
Yeah, I mean, she has paid the price in a way that no prison term. I mean, she'll live with this for the rest of her life. And as a parent, as myself, just watching this body cam, I mean, you could just see her in shock and kind of going through those waves of emotion as she was talking to this officer. One part that stuck out to me is when she is just speaking to the officer, and the other nurse that was there was like, has this ever happened before? I can't be the only person who's ever been through this. I mean, in your experience as a trial lawyer, I mean, how common are cases like this where you have a parent who makes just a terrible mistake? This isn't a case of abuse, but makes this kind of mistake, but then they're in this place where the criminal justice system tries to hold them accountable for it.
They're very rare. In fact, that Emmy back on the corner was for covering the hot car, the toddler death, where the guy left his child and eventually got overturned, right? I mean, they're not that common. They're really not that common, which is why they're newsworthy, which is why we all pay attention to them, because they're so unique. And we all have a deep-seated fear that, what if I made a mistake like that? Am I capable? That's sort of what's getting at us, and why I think this case is so newsworthy, that we're all thinking, could I have ever done something that bad? No. Well, maybe there's a time that I did, and it's just, they're so terrible. I think she really was authentic. I think that video cam probably played a big role on them agreeing to the plea deal, because she did react in a way that I thought was very authentic and very normal. Is this normal? Have you seen this before? Her asking the nurses or the hospital personnel, am I the only person that this has ever happened to? I feel like I'm in a dream and not really waking up. I mean, all those kind of things seem to me like not the words of a criminal, but the words of someone who's just unbelievably devastated by something she did. She owned it. She knows she did wrong, whether it was 5 minutes or 19 minutes. I don't think she ever said it wasn't my fault. I think she said, oh my God, how could this have happened?
And to your point, as far as saying, oh, I had just left the room for 5 minutes or so, she handed her phone over to police officers, no questions asked. I mean, I didn't get the sense that this was someone who was trying to mislead officers. I think when you hand over your phone, and I'm sure for her attorneys that had to have been a moment as well, showing that she seemed at the hospital very forthcoming to officers with whatever questions they were asking.
Right. And what's the memory of someone who's just been through that when you say, how many minutes did you leave your child alone for? And she doesn't say, well, let me look at my phone and let me calculate. She's just thinking 5 minutes. Couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. It's also part of a way to alleviate her guilt. Like, no good mother would leave their child alone in a bathtub for 19 minutes. So I'm a good mother. I couldn't have done that. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. That's just a natural reaction. It's not an intent to deceive. And you're exactly right. She gave them the phone. She didn't hide anything. And she was talking. She wasn't thinking, I'm going to be accused of murder. I need to be quiet and lawyer up and go call my lawyer and invoke my right to not incriminate myself. She was in the moment. And I think she's authentic. And I think a lot of people might think she shouldn't have even been charged. But, if she was charged, she's going to spend a little bit more time in jail. And I think I would not be surprised to see her on the spokesperson circuit on loss prevention. How do you prevent issues? And because when she speaks and you hear her story, it makes you start thinking, what can I do better as a parent? What other safeguards do I need to follow? I imagine there are a lot of organizations that would want her to be involved, and maybe that'll give her life some meaning.
The other part too is going back to the notion of, in the moment you're talking to officers and you're saying, this is what happened, X, Y, and Z. And then as the story continues to unfold, in the eyes of the police officer, it's the story is suddenly changing. How does the criminal justice system, in your experience, law enforcement, handle those moments of recognizing a human being in a moment where they're very stressed and concerned, and they may not, they didn't keep notes of exactly what they did every moment, but then suddenly the cell phone data comes out and the reality of what you were doing is very different than what you were telling them?
I'm sure there's a term for it, like job indoctrination, and we all get polarized. And, police are used to dealing with criminals and people that lie, and people that try to get out of having done something wrong and try to talk their way out of a crime and no, I didn't do it. And so they're skeptical by nature. You know, when you see 12 people in orange jumpsuits come into court for a calendar call, you know they're innocent until proven guilty under the law. But you look at them and say, most of those people probably did something bad. It's just a prejudice that creeps into the system. And I'm sure it's in their mind. And when they start hearing discrepancies, they're trained to look for discrepancies. And how do we figure this out? Because we don't have a black and white picture of somebody doing something illegal. What we have is evidence and cover up and flight and all those kind of post, action circumstances. And they piece them together and their mind works. Okay, she's lying about it. She's trying to get out of it. She's deceptive. And that's probably the way their mind works. And I don't fault them for that. But, there's got to be some discretion. And I wish it hadn't been prosecuted for her sake. It was, and I understand it. I like them out there finding people that are doing real harm intentionally to people than focusing on this. But they had a job to do. They have protocols to follow. And the good news is that it's not going to be the rest of her life in jail for murder one. It's, a few more months and she'll do some thinking and she'll get out and she'll plan her life.
One thing for me would be, though, and this is the one piece, because I agree with a lot of what we're talking about, but there's still apparently a phone call she had about 4 minutes before she called 911, where she talked to the boy's grandmother, where she said that he had just drowned. And that was before she called 911. If you were her attorney, how would you defend that in court?
I would say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, can you really figure out what you would say and what you would do in those circumstances? A scared young mother who's a child herself calls the safest person she can think of. She calls her own family, her own grandmother, and says, help me, what do I do? Do you call them or do you call the strangers at 911 when you know there's nothing they can do because your child's already dead? Was it wrong? Sure, she should have called 911. If she had to do it all over again, she would never have left that child in the bathtub. But hindsight's 2020. She made a mistake. But what she's guilty of is bad judgment in who she called first, not in murder.
Even if you look at that point, I know it was about 20 minutes before EMS were even able to arrive at that point, because I bet prosecutors would respond with that and say that the baby could have survived potentially because the baby ended up dying at the hospital had she called 911 sooner.
Right. But again, as the lawyer, I would say, so maybe her mistake was not calling them sooner, but this was not an intentional act. She did not try, and she wanted to do everything she could. She tried her best to save her child. She called the person that she trusted the most and got guidance from them. And then that person probably told her, or she realized she needs to call 911 because calling grandma isn't working. I don't think that rises to the level of criminal intent. That would be my argument.
No, and no, I appreciate that. And I think going back to the point about how rare these instances are, but you look at this took place in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In your experience, I know you're located in Georgia. I mean, if this case happened somewhere else, how likely is it that it would have gone the path that it did, where she ended up behind bars being charged with manslaughter?
I don't really think it matters which state, which jurisdiction. I think it matters who was involved, who was the police officer, who was the prosecutor, who was the chief prosecutor, what direction do they have for their office, what cases do they prosecute strongly, what cases do they plea out a little bit earlier. It really depends on the personnel, and it might have been another jurisdiction in that state that it would have had a totally different verdict. We see similar cases across the country come out completely differently, talking somebody into suicide or challenging them to commit suicide. We've seen that issue arise, and there's some states where it happens more. But I think it comes down to who is the prosecutor, what is that prosecutor's life story, what is their baggage? Do they have an abusive parent that somehow subconsciously they visualize that this person, they relate them to their abusive parent? It really, I don't think matters state by state. I think it matters person by person, and who's the person deciding to prosecute. What have they been through? What are their life experiences? And how does that affect their decision in this case?
And lastly, for you, she pleads no contest to these charges. For those who don't follow courtroom legalese, what specifically does no contest mean in the realm of guilty, not guilty, plea agreement, all of that?
So you may hear that, you may hear the term nolo contendere, but what that means is I agree that I'm guilty, but I dispute the facts. I don't admit the facts that led to the guilty, but it becomes a conviction. But nobody can ever say, well, you admitted to committing a crime. No, I admitted that the facts would have resulted in a conviction, and that therefore I'm going to accept the guilty verdict, and therefore they are convicted. but they didn't agree and they didn't admit to the facts. It gives them a little way to save face to a small degree.
Always appreciate the help cutting through some of the legalese, and appreciate what you had to say about this Randy Kessler trial lawyer for us. This was, again, a really tough case to talk about, hopefully a very unique case and one that we don't see all too often. Randy Kessler, thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Hopefully people see this and makes them think twice in their own lives. So a little bit of good can come out of it. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of time served, Miller will spend roughly 120 days of her sentence in jail. After that, she'll be released, which is scheduled for the end of January 2025. For Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.